Good Thursday morning and welcome to McKenty Live. The environment. What kind of world do you think we're going to be leaving our children as you look around and see what's happening to our planet? We welcome your calls, 1-800-363-9995, and we welcome indeed this morning special guest to McKenty Live, David Suzuki, scientist, broadcaster, author of a new book of essays, Inventing the Future, Reflections on Science, Technology, and Nature. Published by Stoddard, an excellent book, very provocative, very stimulating. David, how serious are our environmental problems?
Well, I think far more serious than our political and industrial leaders are suggesting. Scientists around the world now are virtually unanimous that unless we take massive and heroic efforts to change the path we're on now, that in 10 years we won't be able to avoid a catastrophic destruction. And in fact, the president of the World Watch Institute is saying that civilization as we know it won't be sustainable after the next century, into the next century. That's how serious it is. Lucien Bouchard, the Minister of the Environment, told me that if we don't do something about global warming, we're talking about the survival of our species. So it's pretty serious talk.
Well, they've just finished an international conference in the Netherlands on global warming, and as I read it, nothing, absolutely nothing of any consequence was done.
Exactly, and this is where Mr. Bouchard said, well, at least we had the meeting and we talked about it. The problem is that people don't realize that it's too late to just talk. And if you look at the reports on that meeting, it was the United States, the greatest contributor to global warming. It was Japan, the second greatest nation, and it was Britain that scotched any kind of statement about what we should aim for. But you know, Canadians are not immune from criticism. Our energy ministers held a meeting last month, and they could not accept the recommendation of the Toronto 1988 atmospheric meeting that said we should reduce carbon dioxide emission by 20% in 15 years. Our ministers couldn't agree to that and said we have to try to hold the line at a 20% increase in 15 years. And yet what scientists are saying is we have to reduce carbon dioxide emission by 70 to 80% in 10 years.
So what's going to turn this around?
I think that it's too late to wait for politicians. We can't educate our present political leaders. It would take too long. The political structures are just packed with people who have done things for decades their own way. Business you can't expect to come on board because they're driven by the priority of short-term profit. I think that what we have to look to is a very powerful grassroots movement. People at the very individual level who are saying we can't wait now. And overwhelmingly, Canadians for years have said that it's not government or industry that's responsible for the environmental crisis. It's every one of us. And what I sense now is a massive movement that's spreading very rapidly where people are saying we have to clean up in our own homes, we have to clean up in our own blocks, in our own communities, and we have to do it because we're the problem and we have to live what we're trying to say now. And I think that this is a powerful movement that in another 2 or 3 years, no politician will be able to ignore it.
I wonder if I hear what you're saying correctly. I've heard men, we're coming up to the Memorial Day, Remembrance Day, say that the most exciting time of their lives was during the war, and that they never recaptured that kind of excitement. Do you think it's and of course we are assuming that wars are finished. Do you think it's possible to mobilize this country and mankind and the Western world for a war against pollution the way we mobilize people to fight a war against Germany?
Absolutely. And this is what we are facing now, is we're talking about the question of whether human beings can survive as a species, not 50, 80 years down the line. We're talking 10, 15 years down the line. We're talking about a world that will be massively changed for the youngsters coming up now. And if that can't mobilize us, I don't know what can.
Okay.
So I think we have to go on a war mentality, a war footing. We are now fighting for the survival of this planet. And that's the level of commitment of resources. The federal government now commits $14 to the defense for every dollar it commits to the environment. And we have to flip that right around.
Yeah. Okay. Want to take some calls? Laval, you're on with David Suzuki.
Hi, I'm calling because I'd like to know what would be the best way to pressure City Hall to start a recycling program here.
Well, I think that this is where people have to begin to act right at the level of your community. You have to, if you care about that, go down, knock on doors in your neighborhood, start soliciting support, get letters, get signatures, until people in your community realize, your leaders realize, that that's something that's overwhelmingly supported. But it's got to come from you. This is what I tell people over and over again. You're going to have to do it in your community.
Yeah.
I listened recently, thank you ma'am, I listened to a couple of women in Westmount here who have gone into this. They actually take all their garbage and put it in a bathtub, and they've measured it and weighed it to see how much it is, and then they go on a campaign to cut it down.
Absolutely. There are all kinds of things you can do. In Vancouver, a woman named Andrea Miller has got her family's garbage reduced to less than 1 bag a month. And she's done this by a massive change in her lifestyle. Of course, she recycles, reuses, composts, all of that stuff. But she does not buy anything in packages. You realize that 50% of our garbage by volume is packaging. And I can't imagine a greater waste. We don't need all that junk around stuff in order to buy it. Start going in and giving your grocers and your drugstore people and your hardware store people, give them hell. Tell them we don't need that. And to ask them to buy stuff without all that packaging.
Okay, we want to come back to that, and we will come back to that with Dr. David Suzuki and our viewers right after this short break. Welcome back to McKenty Live. Welcome back to our conversation about the environment, the desperate threat to our planet, and our special guest, Dr. David Suzuki. A couple of questions before I go to the calls. The situation at St. Basile-le-Grand, the PCBs, you write in the stimulating book that you've just written, PCBs are a symbol of the Faustian bargain we've struck with technology. What do you mean?
Well, we've always had the dilemma that technology does wonderful things for us, and the benefits are immediate and obvious. PCBs were considered a wonder chemical when they were first invented, very inert and resistant to all kinds of things that apparently insulators, for example, are troubled by. So it was a wonder chemical. But we know that every new invention we make has a cost. You don't get anything for free. And the problem with new technologies is, while the benefits are immediate and obvious, the costs usually cannot be anticipated beforehand. It's only after you put the invention in place and then have lived with it for years that you begin to see, my goodness, I didn't realize that would happen.
But there's no way we're going back to the Stone Age.
No, there isn't. But I think that we certainly have achieved a level of affluence and comfort where one has to seriously question how much more we need. And certainly when you look at the third world and see that there are 4 billion people saying, we want to live like Canadians are living, well, do you think the planet could tolerate that?
Okay. Beaconsfield, go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Suzuki.
Yes.
I watched your show Amazonia the other night, and I thought it was really great. And I was wondering if you really believe that all the nuclear this and that, all the population and oil spills, and do you really believe that we can save it?
You have to. If anybody has children, you have to believe that. There is no alternative. What if you look at the question you ask, what are you going to say if you say no? Do we then just roll over, go belly up, and say there's nothing we can do? Then you might as well go out and rape, murder, and steal. It doesn't matter. You have to say we can save it, and you have to fight like mad, and you have to know that it's going to be difficult, especially when we only have 10 years. But there is no alternative to saying, yes, there is a possibility.
Thank you, ma'am. Dollard, go ahead, please.
Yes. Hello, Dr. Suzuki.
Hello.
I'm an avid fan of yours, and I have many things taped and watched them many times, and I really appreciate your being here in Montreal today. It's very timely. I should say that you've been speaking about how there's a need for things to happen at the grassroots level, and I can assure you that in Montreal, the scene is very hot right now on that front. I'm a school teacher. I've been teaching children for 24 years and teaching them out in the environment in the wooded area near my school. And I've watched over that 25 years how the encroachments of urban development have stripped it all away. And my own feeling is that these areas are very important educationally insofar as they're where the population is and where that ethos is going to be affected.
Sir, we have a great many people on the line.
Okay, I'll just put my question. The Green Coalition has a $500 million proposition to make to the provincial government with regard to acquiring the spaces and cleaning up around the island. Can you give us any suggestions? And may I ask, could I present you with our green paper, which we put forward this summer?
You can send me all kinds of stuff. I've got to stack this high. But let me say one thing, that most children in Canada live in urban settings. Many of them don't have the opportunity to go out to the wilderness areas that are left. What we have to do is reconnect children with nature right in the city. And I think that schoolyards are the obvious place. If you look at schoolyards today, it's an area that's hostile to nature. We grow lawn, and I think grass is one of the worst kind of plants to grow. They're highly dependent. They need water, they need care, they need mowing and fertilizers and all that stuff. Let weeds grow there, for heaven's sake. What's wrong with weeds? And weeds support beetles and butterflies. Let's have a butterfly garden in every schoolyard. Let's have a wilderness area there. Let's put in bird feeders and bird houses. Let's put bat houses up there. Let's reforest every schoolyard. Have children as class projects plant trees in their schoolyards. Let's make school an area that is a living area where children can connect with nature. That's the challenge for us, I think.
One of the challenges in Montreal is in the news lately. The St. Lawrence is sick, and it's getting sicker. The trouble is, people in their homes and in their lives, it doesn't seem to me they can make that sort of thing a priority.
Well, it's obvious that government can't, and it's very difficult to do that. But remember that almost 40 million people work and play around the Great Lakes. And what you're living with here is the bottom end of a system of water that's been used as a sewer. Yeah. Now, the problem is this. We have forgotten that above all else, we are animals. And as animals, like every other living organism, we need clean air, clean water, and clean food. Now, what sensible organism would spew poison into the air, the water, and the soil and think that they're immune to it? You know, in Toronto, it costs $400 to plant a tree. Toronto cuts down thousands of trees every year. They should be reforesting the city. They only plant 1,500. Why? Because it costs $400 to plant a tree. Why does it cost $400 to plant a tree? Because if you put a small tree into the ground in Toronto, it dies. The air is so bad, the plant can't survive. They have to wait to get a 10-year-old tree in the country, dig it out, and carry it into the city. And what crazy person would think that if young trees can't live in the air, that it's okay for young babies?
Okay. Lines blazing. Ottawa, go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Suzuki, I'm wondering whether you would be an advocate of perhaps terrorist or civil disobedience to try and get major polluters to change their way of thinking.
Well, okay, let me say this very clearly. I can understand that people feel desperate and are taking desperate measures. I do not support that. I cannot support that as a public person. I think that there are other ways to do it, but I understand why people are reverting to civil disobedience, because they're frustrated, they're afraid, they're angry. But I would say that we have to put much greater pressure on our political leaders to put polluters, and I'm not talking about the guy that's working down in the factory there, put polluters who are the company officers into jail and find them so it hurts. And don't buy that argument that if you fine us, if you make us subscribe to certain pollution control levels, that we're going to lose jobs and we're going to lose our business. Look at Inco. Look at now one of the leaders of Inco is saying we're environmentalists, and they've got a very good record now, but it took years and years to make Inco cut down its emissions, and they're still making money, and all the way along the line they fought tooth and nail against any imposition of standards. But you've got to get government to do that, because that's why we put them into office.
Okay, sir, thank you for calling. Right back with our callers and with David Suzuki after this short break. Welcome back to McKenty Live. One quick question. You talk in your very stimulating book, Inventing the Future, that we need a fundamental change of attitude that is almost quasi-religious. I've been reading and hearing about scientists who are talking about a kind of connection between human beings and nature that is where there is a consciousness in human beings, but there is a kind of consciousness in nature, and we have lost the connection, and we have to rebuild the connection.
I agree. If you look at the human species on the planet, we have all of the characteristics of a cancer. We're growing out of control. We're in that phase of massive growth. We're pulling in all of the energy from other organisms, and we're causing a lot of death of other parts of the ecosystem. We are like a cancer. We have lost our sense of place and belonging, and we really believe that we have it within our grasp to control all of nature. It's a kind of arrogance, a hubris, that simply is going to be self-destructive in the end.
Okay. Montreal, go ahead, please.
Yes, Dr. Suzuki. I'm presently a chemistry student at university, and I was wondering what you felt would be...
You should be home studying, not watching TV.
No, don't.
I'm studying. Actually, I'm taping it and on my way to class. I was wondering what you believe would be the best educational background in order to be in a position to promote change and be heard, whether it would be policy reform, educating children, so that it becomes inherent in their thinking to change the world.
Well, I think that if you're concerned about those goals, then you get whatever you think you're good at, whether you're in science, whether you're in economics, whether you're in commerce, it doesn't matter. As long as you keep your head fixed on the goals and don't get co-opted by these disciplines, go in and get the education and the training you need to go out later on. I don't think it really matters very much.
You don't think it's necessary to have a science background?
I don't think, absolutely. I think that it's not necessary. I think that people should be aware of science and be educated in science, but it doesn't mean you have to specialize in science.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for calling, and I want to mention another book that Dr. Suzuki mentions in his book, and it's one of my favorite books, E.F. Schumacher, Small is Beautiful. If you haven't read the book, read it.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful book. NDG.
Mr. Suzuki, I'm a great admirer of yours, and I think you provide a wonderful consciousness and a great message for children. I was wondering, though, I must admit I'm a little bit depressed after finish reading one of your columns or watching the television. It seems like there's a sense of hopelessness once I'm done watching it.
You know,
I was wondering, are there any bright spots at all?
Of course there are. The fact that we're sitting here talking about it and suggesting individual things that can be done. But you know, it's really important to meet this gloom and doom, because I've been criticized by a number of my colleagues in academia who say that your message is too depressing. There's too much gloom and doom. You've got to be more optimistic. You've got to be more upbeat. But my answer to that is, suppose your child falls sick and you take your child to a doctor and the doctor says, I'm sorry, I've got bad news, your child is going to die. But if we now face up to it and begin massive and heroic treatment, we can save your child's life. What do? Do you say to the doctor, don't tell me about it, I don't want to, that's too depressing, it's too gloom and doom. You have to face up to the facts so that then you can choose the best possible way to handle your child's future. And that's what we face now. There is too much denial. There is too much unwillingness to confront the reality. We're talking about 10 years. Now that's scary as hell. But unless we face it straight on, we're not going to be serious about dealing with it.
I agree with you, but during the course of your travels, have you seen anything that enlightens you or makes...
Absolutely, I've been talking about that. A powerful grassroots movement. And it may be what you think is trivial, that is being able to reduce one's garbage, which results in a change in lifestyle.
Recycling.
But that movement is massive, and as it sweeps the country, it will preclude, it will roll over the political and industrial process. It is undeniable. The only question in my mind is, will it happen fast enough?
Thank you so much. Continue.
Thank you. Laval, go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. I think I have more of a comment. I've been following your series on individual effort, and I have started, for example, by changing to cloth diapers from disposable.
Good for you.
A couple weeks ago, I believe, I turned on the 12 o'clock news, and there was a brief message that came across the screen saying that the only sewage disposal plants in Montreal had broken down, and they could not find the pieces, and it was like, oh well, so well. we're just dumping the sewage into the river. And I was really overcome with a sense of feeling helpless, and that even my personal efforts were futile. And I guess I would like to bring that out. Like,
well, we've been using the air, the water, and the soil as a sewage disposal area for years, but I think it's the awareness. We're going to have to accept that there are going to be these accidents, but we have to keep pushing to make sure that that doesn't continue. I think it's symbolic right now for Canada that the two provincial capitals on the east and west coast, that is Halifax and Victoria, still dump raw sewage into the oceans. The Americans have had, for years, have not allowed boats, private boats or commercial boats, to dump sewage into the oceans. Canada doesn't say a damn thing about it. Anybody can dump it in. And we have got used to this idea that we've got a vast country and we can just keep dumping the stuff out there and it's not going to matter. But we've come to the end, and that can't be allowed any longer.
And that sort of thing can only be changed by pressure on the politicians.
Absolutely.
Lobbies. Okay. Downtown Montreal, go ahead, please.
Hi, yeah, you were talking about packaging. In my neighborhood, most of the stores sell in bulk because it's better for everybody all around, and the grocers are very conscious of the environment. But we're kind of held hostage by the big chain stores, the couple that are in the neighborhood. One of them and a hardware store which sells everything packaged, all the little nuts and bolts and little batteries, and you complain and complain, and they tell you, look, it's shoplifting. If you wouldn't shoplift, we wouldn't put these things in big bulk packages. They cut down their staff, which is cheaper for them, package everything, and they think they save on shoplifting, although I think shoplifters learn how to lift the stuff in the packaging anyway. And you, every time you buy something, you feel like you're committing an environmental crime, but you got to have hardware stuff if you want to do stuff around yourself, a house, and save money.
Okay, ma'am. I'd like to have
bylaws or what? You know?
Well, I think ultimately there have to be laws on this. Canadians use 50% as much packaging as Europe or Japan, and they, those two areas live very high and very well. Why do we need all this stuff? We don't need it. And I think you have to get legislation then to force that. But in the meantime, you in your community can begin buying runs in bulk. Find other sources, buy it in bulk, and for construction workers or whatever, and begin to disseminate that stuff from your own community. I know it's a pain, but that's what's got to happen.
And we'll be right back after this short break. David, I want to thank you for being with us this morning. Recommend again your new book, Inventing the Future, and remind viewers that you're signing books today at the Paragraph Bookstore at noon, I think. Tomorrow on McKenty Live, Meech Lake. If it dies, does Canada die? And do you care? We'll see you tomorrow at 11.
Neil McKenty's wardrobe provided exclusively by Henry Marks on Drummond Street and Westmount Square. Transportation for McKenty Live provided by Bernard Limousine, 353-5881.